law matters? Of course it does. Welcome once again. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. As we tell you, this long-running program continues to provide legal information, practical examples, practical assistance to help you with the law matters. A better understanding of the law makes you in a better position to handle issues that you might need to contend with, and also gives you a better opportunity to protect yourself, your family, and your business. As we present various topics, you may decide, as we suggest, to handle some issues yourself. If you decide to enlist professional help, you'll be better prepared, as will the professional you enlist. Of course, our goal, as always, is to save you time, money, and achieve the best possible results. And as always, we want to welcome and thank Attorney David Bizarre from the Bizarre & Associates law firm in East Providence, who continues to provide information and insights in each session. And today, together, David and I want to welcome our special guest, Steve Cass, a well-known news radio talk show host who has interviewed world leaders and a variety of controversial guests for decades. So today, appropriately, our discussion is about news, fake news, and its impact. Recently, or ripped from the headlines, as they say, Fox News is accused of circulating disinformation, misinformation, a false narrative about the 2020 election. A company called Smartmatic and other voting system companies have tried to allegedly rig the race against Trump. So we'll discuss this case and other cases as well. Certainly the line between fake news and real news is a bit blurry. It's difficult to distinguish at times. Sometimes real news outlets just plainly get it wrong. So is that with malice? Is it their intention? What actually happens? And more importantly for us, what can be done about it? What laws are designed to protect us and yet also keep in place the First Amendment? So let's start, as we usually do, with David. What are the laws that are protecting us against fake news and against First Amendment issues? What do you have to say?
So when you're talking about news, if somebody is presenting something in the format of news and they give you information that they know or should otherwise have known is not correct and don't do anything to correct it, there can be some liability for that. But it's a difficult situation to be able to prove that in a court of law. If you go back to the New York Times and the famous case on libel and slander, there is some protection even when you give information that isn't correct. It's when you give information that's not correct and you do so with what they call malice. There is then liability if it can be proven that not only did you know it was wrong, but you didn't do anything to correct the record on it.
And so is there an issue about you presenting only one side of the story? Is that considered to be fake news or just an error and omission which presents not an entirely full story of what happened and in a newsworthy sense?
So when you present just one side of the story, it's just slanted news. It's not fake news necessarily, and it's probably not a violation. It's when you do that in the side of the story you're presenting isn't real or true, and you don't do anything, and it affects somebody. So in the Fox News case where there's a lawsuit being brought, it's because you presented one side of a story and a side of the story that may not have had any truth to it, and you didn't allow the other side to present their side or the truth, and it was done in such a way that affected that company so that they lost business and were damaged or their reputation was damaged by what you did.
So are we talking just and only about defamation? Is that an issue too in this whole situation?
Well, that's really what it's about. And it's about, you can have a news show, theoretically a news show, that's really an opinion show. And you can't sue someone for having their opinion and stating their opinion. Cass may differ on that. But if your opinion is your opinion and not based on, I'm giving you news, I'm giving you information, I'm giving you something that I'm presenting as news, there might be a little more protection from the First Amendment, your opinion. But when your opinion slides over to affecting someone's reputation, affecting a person in putting them in a false light, and you do it knowing that your opinion is based on information that is untrue, there can be liability for that.
And not always do they tell you this is just our opinion, this is the news. So this is a good time, I think, to toss it to Steve. So you've hosted news radio formats for years, and you, in dealing with news, you also had opinions. So
No.
give us your
Talk show host with an opinion? Never.
So give us your perspective about that, especially since there's the news component as well as the editorial. How do you deal with the line, and how do you present it?
Well, first of all, remember a thing called equal time?
Correct.
We were obligated by law to, if we invited a guest on one side of a topic, we had to give equal time to the other side of the topic. Somehow, I guess the media guys decided they didn't like that.
It changed?
So we lost that, which I thought was a great idea, but forget it. There's so many portions of this story. When I started, and I've done television news, and I've done radio, and I've done talk radio. So they're all three very different subjects, occupations. But the problems that we face today are so unique and so different. When I started, we had to have three sources for a story if it was controversial or perhaps attacking someone. You had to have three sources to back you up that it was true. And if you didn't have that, then you were fired on the spot. I don't care where you were. I mean, that's how we were trained. Walter Cronkite, that period.
Yes.
There was no fake news then. Those guys really researched everything they did. We have some editorial writers. Froma Harrop is a nationally syndicated columnist.
There are many.
We know her personally. We know the research she does before she says anything.
So it has to be fact-based.
Few and far between. And there are others, but not a lot.
So there is editorial, and you have an opportunity to do that, and the various Fox stations, CNNs, and the rest, they all are entitled to have an opinion and someone who has a position statement. And not always are they saying, this is all of the news that's available. As it is right now, journalism has its issues. It's costly to produce good journalism. Reportage does cost. With websites, news that's radio or print, do we have any laws in place that forces the platform, whatever it is, even Facebook news, is there any law in place, David, that makes them vet this, and should they have to vet everything that's being positioned as news?
I think that there's different rules that apply to different media, and that's part of the problem right now. There isn't the same rules that apply to the internet and Facebook and those types of things as applies to print media or to radio or TV. And I think it's come to the point where we need to look at that, because a lot of the information that's put out there that isn't regulated on the internet is where a lot of this false information will come from.
So
you mean like 60%?
Like 90.
90.
No, I don't think it's 90.
So it could be.
Most of it's gossip. But
Yeah.
And let's address that. Gossip. There were newspapers, there are still newspapers that are considered to be the supermarket tabloids. Most people knew automatically that that was soft side of fake news. No one really looked at that as the standard bearer of all truth. Now there are television stations, there are online components to it that are the equivalent of supermarket tabloids. What can be done to help people know and check and make sure that what they're reading isn't as obvious as what we all knew as the Inquirer or whatever the other ones were? What can be done about that? Steve, do you want to comment on that?
Well, I don't think anything can be done about it, frankly. And, I worked at I did TV news for a couple of years on Channel 6. Did radio by day and TV by night. It was a long day, but which is going on right now with a certain guy named Gene Valicenti. However, now it seems everything is a battle. Everybody wants to be first, and every newsroom has multiple TV sets monitoring the competition. And the biggest fear is that you're going to be scooped. Now, I don't particularly care who's first with a news story. As long as it's accurate and valid, fine. But they are. So
It's an
now
issue.
there's a race for that, number one. Number two, we never had Twitter.
Which is
So now all of a
instantaneous.
sudden we have a way to get a story out immediately, which whether it's true or not is irrelevant because most of it isn't true. But it serves a purpose. Could be somebody trying to attack a competitor, like some of the reviewers, about restaurants. And
Bloggers.
you see the opposition, spreads false stories about them. I wouldn't believe anything on social media at all. I just
Grain
don't.
of salt.
I don't even look at it really anymore.
Grain of salt. And
Someone mentions my name, I look to see if they're calling me names. That's okay. I'm used to that.
But the problem is, when you had the National Enquirer or any of those other types
Well,
of...
they were pretty
you,
far out.
You knew
Yeah,
when
you
you were
knew,
in the headline, some famous person having an alien's baby was not true.
With four heads.
With four heads.
Yes.
But the National Enquirer banner isn't over the banner of social media, whether you're getting it from Twitter or Facebook or whatever other sources there are. And so it doesn't come sort of with that disclaimer over it this is for fun, don't believe it.
Right, and some are with malicious intent, some are not. So honestly, one side of what I do, I'm paid to do communications. Part of it is relating to the media, part of it is paid communications, advertising, and all of that is very important, and it's, I think, an important thing to mention. When it comes to news, ratings, getting the highest rating, the most eyeballs matter, and in many cases, whether it's a legitimate story or one that's not, it still may capture attention, garner ratings, and therefore generate money. So we say this just because our viewers, our listeners, or our readers in newspaper all need to be aware that that is a driving force. Steve?
Well, the newspaper wants to sell newspapers.
Of course.
It's all about the dollar.
Yes.
The radio and TV stations want ratings, so that nobody will advertise on them. So everybody's driven by the almighty buck, not by the truth,
Not
or by
all
any
of them.
sort of public service. I mean, when I did a talk show for years, I thought of myself as had this wonderful, what's the word I'm looking for, opportunity to help people. And I can't tell you, the majority of my calls were people who had a problem with the government for the most part, and they couldn't get it solved.
Yeah.
And, that can really wipe people out.
Right.
Very
And
difficult.
it does. And I was always able, because I had the microphone, to make a phone call and embarrass the hell out of the person that was screwing them, and it
Terrible.
would be solved in 1 hour.
Right.
And I can
Not
tell you
everything can
100
be.
situations like that.
And
David?
so when you
But I
have-
wasn't an entertainer.
Right. And that's the difference. You went from being a problem solver to what they now do is supposed to be
Well,
entertainment.
I had this wonderful privilege of having this microphone and talking to a couple 100,000 people every day.
Yes.
Right.
So, David?
I was blessed.
So the question I think then becomes is how do we regulate it? How do we make it become what it should have been and what it always used to be?
The title of your program is Law Matters. And I would add sometimes I was going to change the name to Law Matters Sometimes.
No, it always
Well,
matters.
given the amount of corruption and illegality that I've covered in the last 30 years.
You worry about it.
I really?
You do worry about
It may matter, but
So-
who's obeying it? I don't know.
So we're trying to address that, and I think this is a good time too to think about. While we know that there are very well-known, questionable media outlets, many of them do try to get it right, and we understand that it's costly to do good reportage and stay on top of it. But there are ways that people can check. And we should point this out. There are ways that people can do some of their own checking because they are going to see 2, 3, 4 different sides of a story. Well known are some of those websites like Snopes, and even those, and Political Fact Check, but even those need to be vetted. People need to look at who's writing, what their position is. It's easy enough to check some of those things out, and all the more important that they do. So what would you say, David, about the importance of the First Amendment? While we were talking about Fox in that story initially, people have a right to say their opinion, even if it's not something that we agree with generally.
So that's true. You have a right to have an opinion. What you don't have the right to do is to knowingly lie and put out misinformation, especially when it's damaging somebody else and their reputation. So where the line is crossed is when you knowingly allow things to be said on your airways without having somebody rebut it or point out the fact that we know this isn't true and we know it's a lie. And you need to, as you said back in the time of, what was it called, equal time?
Yeah.
Yes.
You need to be, I think we need to have some of that again. So
Can it be legislated?
I think it could be.
Well, the media fought it.
And there was a reason they did.
Sure.
But does it still exist for politics when you have one politician on? You don't even have to have the other politician on?
None whatsoever, no.
Not at all.
Nope.
Yeah, we need to get back to where both sides of a story are heard.
And
And
so,
well, it wasn't just politics. It was if you would criticize a company or a business.
You would have to allow the other side.
Absolutely, you had to have another side to that story.
Right.
You
And
know,
that-
whatever happened to the world of, remember when you took debating, I assume
Sure.
you took that.
Yes.
one.
Yep.
Both of you did, I did, and you had to develop both sides of a story.
Right.
And that was your job, it was your assignment.
It was the first year of law school.
Okay.
And the professor would ask you a question about the law, and then he asked you, okay, now you're on the other side of that.
Right.
You know, argue it both ways.
Right.
And the point is, the public should be able to hear both sides of a story.
Correct.
from a legal standpoint,
They should be interested in hearing
both
it.
sides.
Right
That's a
now,
good
nobody's
point, too.
interested.
Right.
That's a
I
good-
believe I'm a right-wing person, I'm a left-wing
left-wing,
person, and the other guy's a liar and a cheat and should be killed. I mean, that's
That's not
insanity
reasonable.
what's going on today.
Right.
so
Including in our Congress, which
So-
is really frightening.
So what should happen? What is legally considered to be responsible and defensible? So you have a position and you are a media outlet and you have been told, say for example in the case of that Smartmatic, gave information to Fox News and said, we have had these checks, this was not rigged. Please submit this, provide the other side of the story. So they never referred to that email or that information. So at what point does it become not reasonable? At what point do you have a case against them for not taking that information into consideration, that someone made a remark or someone had the rebuttal? How much leeway do you get to make it right?
So the Constitution does allow you to present your side and your opinion and have your right to free speech. And I would imagine the reason a media company, and we'll go with Fox since that's what this case is about, wants to present their story the way they want to present it is because they get their ratings and they get their advertising and they make money. So when they step over the line, I think one of the ways you're going to have the law try to make them change how they approach things is by reaching into their pocket and having a lawsuit like this that punishes them for not being reasonable and doing the right thing.
So let's follow up on that a moment, David. So Fox gets sued. That's what we opened up with. But there were three other people. There was Judge Peary, Lou Dobbs, and one other whose name escapes me at the moment. Apparently, it's not just at Fox, but apparently they can go after the three people who were involved individually. How you always say that there's deepest pockets, so is it legitimate that they continue to go after not just the station, but those who were on-air personalities at the time, and how much farther does that get to go?
So it's sort of the reverse of the deep pocket, although they probably all have deep pockets,
Yes.
having those jobs. But I think the point of the plaintiff in bringing all of them in is to say, the company allowed them to do this, they're responsible for what they do, but they're the ones who did it. And I think that's why they want to reach into their pocket so that they learn a lesson too.
So Maria Bartiromo was the other one. So Steve, in the years that you were on air, the radio station, the television station had certain standards, parameters within which you're to work. Would you have ever been held personally liable for misrepresenting if they could prove that you misrepresented?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was an animal rights advocate. I think Rush Limbaugh called me an animal rights wacko or something like that, which I thought, badge of honor. And I got very involved in circuses and the cruelty to animals, specifically elephants, how they were beaten and tortured to do things. And I had proof and evidence of it. And a local charity in Rhode Island made a lot of money with their annual circus.
Yes.
And they made the mistake of buying advertising on my show.
Okay.
That was a huge mistake because they spent a lot of money, $25,000, and I killed them because I had evidence that they were one of the worst in the country
Okay.
in terms of animal abuse. They called the station. They're going to sue me. They're going to do this. They're going to do that.
But they couldn't.
And the station was very nervous.
Of course.
In fact, it turned out that they finally realized it was a big fundraiser for them, and that cost them a lot of money. And so finally, they acknowledged they had the guts to say, Cass is right.
And
we know it. And we knew it, and we looked the other way because we made the money.
So there was some comeuppance, and there was an...
And that was one example.
Yes.
But I was not, I mean, I was very careful in what I did.
And you had to be then. And
But on that issue, I had evidence and I had video. We had video of it happening.
Well, there's fact.
And they're denying it? I mean, wait a minute, here, look at the tape.
I know often David would say, make sure you have the facts, make sure you have that cell phone video, the photo, or whatever.
Retain your evidence. And the point is that if you hadn't been right, if you had made statements...
I was guilty.
You would have been liable.
I was wrong, absolutely.
Yep.
So
not only would they have sued you, the station would have fired you.
Yep.
So
guaranteed.
While we were talking about Fox and that the judge that says this case can go forward, that they can be sued, there were also the 3 people who were brought up individually. So Judge Pirro was one, and they dismissed the suit. So in her case, they said she was an anchor. She certainly was talking about stolen votes, but never outright specifically said that company absolutely rigged the machines, and because of that, she can no longer be sued. Does that make sense? Or should they have still been able to go after her for, claiming that they stole the election?
The lawsuit in that particular case is really narrowed and focused in on the damage to that particular company. So what the judge is saying is that although she may have had information out there that wasn't true, she didn't specifically make a claim against this company on those issues that company's suing for. So if she didn't make that claim, then the company can't sue her for making that claim.
Okay. And then in the case of Sidney Powell, this seemed rather interesting, that defamation case was also dismissed because there was a lack of jurisdiction. So David, that's a lack of jurisdiction seems like a technicality. The issue is the issue. How does that play out? Is that legitimate?
Well, in the law, there's a lot of things you have to do for a lawsuit to be able to go forward. For example, and I don't know where they brought that suit or what the jurisdictional issue is, but a court has to have what they call personal jurisdiction, jurisdiction over the individuals, and subject matter jurisdiction. So if I were to sue someone in probate court for a contract case, the probate court would say, hey, we don't have jurisdiction for that kind of case. I can't bring it there. It doesn't mean I don't have a case. It just means I didn't bring it in the right court. So again, I'm not familiar with the facts of what the jurisdiction were in that case.
And I think a lot of the problems come from the people on the air, obviously Fox, those guys are really invested in Trump.
Right.
And I assume that they believed what he said and what his people told them was true. Now what?
Right.
Are they guilty of lying? They believed what they were saying.
So what about the intent? Was it malicious that they did, at one point they could say, this is what we believe and this is based on what we have. We believe that there's a problem with the machines. Okay, that seems legitimate, could be wrong, could be right. But once they hear that there is information that says this is not a rigged machine, the technology was okay, at some point, is there not a reason that you need to pull that back or announce that here's the latest?
I think so. I think you can make a statement that you've been given, you believe, even if you haven't done all your homework, perhaps you can still do it. But once you've been given information on the other side of that, and that has been brought to your attention, and you continue to say it and don't present the other side, that's where liability starts to
And what
come
about
from.
First Amendment rights that Fox still has? I mean, they're countersuing, which is, I guess, a predictable knee-jerk reaction, and which you can understand. They think that they consider that story newsworthy, and therefore they could continue. I don't want to, editorialize by saying continue forcing that point, but they were certainly carrying that factoid or that issue a little bit farther than perhaps it needed to. It maybe went too far, too long. So do they really end up having a legitimate stance with that counterclaim? I mean, obviously they don't want to be sued. Is that a legitimate counterclaim at this point? Is there being a newsworthy outlet reporting news?
You have a right as a news outlet, and you even have a right to have your own narrative that you want to push, if it's backed up by the facts. But once you have stepped over the line as to what's opinion and fact, and your opinion is now no longer based on facts, and you keep pushing it out to the detriment of other people and their standing. Going back to that case, the New York Times, I think it was versus Sullivan, which was the libel case, if they can prove malice, and it's a hard thing to prove, intent. Then you've stepped over the line, and you will be liable despite your First Amendment rights to say what you want to say.
Even lawyers are in trouble right now. Some of the lawyers who will push the Trump lie about.
That's correct, because
they want to be disbarred.
Well, that's my point.
Them,
lawyers owe an ethical duty to the courts, not to give information to courts that they know that the information's not true.
Are ethics an issue that can be legalized? I mean, ethics, it's an issue. You want to be ethical. You want to be ethical.
Sometimes they become laws.
Yeah. So for practicing as a lawyer, you have to follow the canons of ethics. Those are our laws, so to speak, that we have to follow.
Except for the Supreme Court?
Supreme Court has its own rules, and they get to make those rules.
That's another topic.
But we're talking the United States Supreme Court.
Yes, point of clarification there. So there's a reference to what cheap news is, cheap speech. There are so many platforms, media outlets that are not vetted, that are not traditional, that don't have to use and abide by the usual channels. Do you think, I would ask both of you, do you think that that is a legitimate thing that we need to, if not legislate, at least make people aware of, namely that this is the Wild West. This really is something that's not been vetted. Do we need to say something about that, or
a disclaimer?
A disclaimer? Is that all that's needed?
What do you think?
Well, I think there should be something.
Should every media outlet just start a newscast with, this may or may not be true?
Well, if they don't know, they should.
If you like it, depends on what side you're on.
Right.
So,
crazy.
I guess the question too is, do you still think that there is reason for people to pay attention to the news and just do it a little bit more, be a little more circumspect? Do you think that we need to do more homework?
Yeah, I think everybody should listen to what has been told, and then follow up on their own to see whether or not there's some accuracy to it.
Right.
And so, Steve, even if you aren't currently on the air, you still look at news. How many newspapers do you?
Oh, 3 or 4.
To fact check.
Well, to me, I believe in newspapers. Big supporter of newspapers. Television doesn't do it for me.
I think it is important to say that right now so many do rely on aggregators, meaning that one source will then end up essentially use another's and claim it as their own in some cases, but just collect it. And so it's a good thing to be aware of that. You should be vetting your news when you can. We thank you for tuning into The Law Matters. Please continue to do so. As we say, the law matters to you.